The gorilla is an animal that is incredibly important to me and for all of humanity and its entirety.
Well, wildlife conservation has always been a challenging task, but for rangers in Virunga National Park, it can be deadly. Virunga is Africa's oldest wildlife sanctuary, and it's home to just over 1,000 critically endangered mountain gorillas. It lies in a troubled region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where rangers face threats from militias and poachers. Last month, 6 park workers were killed in an ambush. A spokesman for the sanctuary blamed rebels for the attack. It's believed to be the worst incident in the park's history, where more than 170 rangers have died over the past 2 decades. So how can Virunga be protected when security continues to deteriorate? And what drives the staff to keep working in such dangerous conditions? Well, whom better to ask than Emmanuel de Merode? He is Virunga National Park's director and chief warden and has himself survived an attack by gunmen. Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, the job to protect one of the most biologically diverse areas in the world really has become increasingly dangerous, to say the least. Help us understand what you are really up against and how much you and your rangers are at risk.
Very briefly, some of the context. Virunga National Park is one of the richest national parks in the world in terms of its wildlife. But it's also situated in one of the most difficult areas of the world in terms of political conflict. And so Virunga has suffered a series of civil wars over the last 20 years, which collectively are believed to have caused the death of over 6 million people in eastern Congo. The park hasn't been spared. And in fact, 175 of our staff have been killed during that very difficult period. And so it's an extremely dangerous job, but it's also an extremely important job because the role of a national park ranger isn't just about protecting the wildlife, it's also about protecting the people who live and pass through the park, but also trying to regain control of the trafficking networks that are funding the armed groups that are behind the war. So all of that together makes it, as you rightly say, a very, very dangerous job for Virunga's rangers.
So what have you witnessed as far as the risks are concerned? I mean, we just saw 6 of your staff lose their lives in an ambush. You yourself were actually shot during an attack. How did all this unfold? Tell us what happens. Do you know you're going specifically into dangerous areas where these rebels might be, or poachers for that matter? What exactly is happening?
Well, what's happening is that our staff are confronted with a number of very difficult issues. One is that they have a responsibility to protect the park. They also have a responsibility to protect the people inside the park. And unfortunately, there are also a large number, we estimate between 1,500 and 2,000 armed militia who are inside the park, drawing on the natural resources in the park as a wide range of trafficking networks.
So, Emmanuel, you and your staff are not there just to protect the park and its biodiversity and the species in it. You're there to protect some of the 4 million people that actually live in the area. But Virunga has gotten so much attention internationally because of the just over 1,000 critically endangered mountain gorillas that are still living there. What kind of threat are they facing? When we say critically endangered, it means they're almost gone. If you're facing this kind of security risk for your own people, how serious is the risk that these animals will actually disappear?
The mountain gorilla population has more than doubled in the last 15 years, in spite of the civil war, in spite of the incredible hardship that the rangers are under. And this actually makes it one of the greatest success stories in African conservation. And so it is good news for wildlife conservation in Africa, but it's also very good news locally for the people in that we actually do have a thriving tourism industry now. Over 15,000 visitors have come to Virunga in the last 3 years. And so last year, $4 million was brought into the local economy through the mountain gorillas. And so there's very much a win-win story that's developing around Virunga with respect to the mountain gorillas and with respect to the local people.
That is a relief to hear. I mean, one of your objectives, too, is to help drive the local economy because so many of its people suffer from a miserable level of poverty. But tell us, I mean, is it getting harder and harder for you to recruit local hires as rangers, for example, now that the danger for them has escalated? And when they do come to you, are they dedicated to protecting the park, or is it more because they really just need to work?
Well, at a very personal level, it's what I find the most motivating about my work is the incredible commitment of my colleagues who are the rangers who face these incredible dangers every day, who see their own colleagues falling, getting very severely wounded or killed, and yet continuing the work. And this is something I've seen now for 25 years that I've been here. And it makes it an incredible commitment, incredibly motivating to continue the work. You're asking how difficult it is to recruit. I mean, there's two things. One is that we have a 70% unemployment amongst the young generation in the region. And the other is that there's an incredible tradition of wildlife conservation. So there's a lot of prestige and a lot of pride tied to the profession of being a wildlife ranger. So when we recruited last year for 100 positions as rangers, we had over 6,500 candidates who wanted those positions. So there's huge demand and desire to work as a ranger. But at the same time, it is incredibly difficult for them. And
Right.
it seems to be getting harder as time goes by.
And Emmanuel, we just have a minute left, and I'd like you to tell us why you're there personally, because you could very easily return to Europe and live a very comfortable lifestyle, but you remain in Virunga in these dangerous conditions. Why is it so important to you to stay and protect that park?
Well, for me, like I said, the main reason is the people that I work with and their commitment. So I feel very tied to playing my role, doing the little that I can to try and help as best I can. But there's also another reason, which is that it's actually working. So like I said, the mountain gorillas are increasing in numbers quite dramatically, but also the economy is being rebuilt. Thanks to the park. The park is developing tourism. It's generating a lot of electricity. Currently, 80% of the province's electricity comes from the national park, comes from rivers that flow out of the park and are harnessed to create clean energy for a new industry.
I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and best of luck with your work going forward.